Okay, everyone, we're live. This is Tim Johns, and I want to introduce to you Britt Hancock right here. He's the star of the show in this gathering right here. Jesus is, of course.
Help us, Jesus.
Yeah,
Man.
exactly. But and I just want to capture who's here. So introduce yourselves. Jeff Newbern,
Chris Huey,
Sue Renning, Laura Albert,
Joshua Horak.
and there's the beautiful Britt Hancock. So Britt is the founder and executive director, leader of Mountain Gateway Ministries, a missions organization. He trains missionaries. And Brett, I consider Brett literally an expert in experiential learning, relational learning. And his passion is to help intercept people wherever they're at in their life and help them transform into Christ-likeness so that they can go on the mission field healthy, whole, and competent to deal with really difficult situations. And they do a lot of remote wilderness missions. And so Britt is an expert in wilderness training. He uses wilderness as a backdrop to train people in character and intimacy with Jesus, all the key things. But the thing that I'm real interested in talking to him about tonight is his ability to see the trades and business and carpentry, the fundamental skills, life skills, as also another tool to help people develop in their character, mature as people, and have the resilience, the competence, the competency to advance the kingdom wherever they go. So he's a master at this. He integrates that in his missions training, which is super unique, unlike any missions training I've ever encountered. The use of wilderness and the trades to equip people is like amazing. Plus, he takes a bunch of time, more than that, more than the average training. So, Britt, I want to talk to you now about why it's really important to integrate experiential learning in the forming of people's character and their minds and life. Okay?
Sure.
All right.
Awesome.
So why is this important? Why does God use it? Why do you integrate it? Just take off and fly and let your heart out.
Well, I didn't start off with the philosophy and the idea and head off into it from sort of hearing a good argument and saying, yeah, that's right, and so trying to get into it that way. In my family, we probably have 6 generations of builders, engineers, and manufacturers.
Wow.
And so I grew up, literally my first word was hammer. Really? Truly.
Oh, that is so...
And
That's awesome.
My dad's lead carpenter gave me a hammer when I was a little bitty guy.
Oh.
I beat the snot out of my mother's furniture with
I
it
love it.
as a toddler.
That's awesome.
And so some of my earliest memories were on the job site with my dad.
Right.
And so my dad, we had multiple companies.
Mm-hmm.
We had a scaffold manufacturing company. We had lots of rental property. We had a construction company and an engineering firm. And we did commercial, residential, and industrial construction.
Right.
We built roads, dams, bridges, high-rise buildings, houses. You know, and you're old enough to remember the building crunch that hit in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And so my dad was diversified, and so if one thing was not working or an industry was down, he would do something else.
Amazing.
And so he held all of the trades licenses himself. And so we didn't sub anything out my whole growing up. That was kind of seen as a negative thing. And so it gave my dad a competitive edge. So he literally did everything, all the structural designs, and he, you know, for years he could stamp his own drawings, and we didn't have to hire an electrician or a plumber or an HVAC or any of that. And so, so I really don't have any time in my memory banks where I was not on the job site working, doing something. And so my
Even
dad,
as a young guy, like a kid.
I literally mean from the time I was 3 years old, probably, I was probably had my hand on a drill while my dad was drilling holes and studs to pull wires.
Right.
And things like that.
Yep.
So I was just always there. And
beautiful.
My mother got pregnant when she was probably 30 years old, and she didn't, at the time, you know, she didn't like that she felt like she was really old. And my dad said, no, it's okay. He'll just go with me everywhere. So I was always with him. I was in his meetings. I was on the job. And so it's so ingrained in my thought pattern that I was always doing something with him. And so I learned how to weld. I learned how to run milling machines, lathes.
This is amazing.
Electrical work, HVAC work. And so I literally thought that my dad could do anything and that he could solve any problem. From a little bitty guy, we did the big scaffold erection projects and chemical plants and way high off the ground, 300 feet high, walking on a 12-inch walkboard, carrying scaffold frames, erecting scaffolds. And my dad, he was afraid of heights, but he had a scaffold company, and he would stand down on the ground with a pair of binoculars and a radio in his hand, and we'd run into a problem way up high somewhere, and he would be telling us on the radio, you know, no, this, that, and the other, and he was telling me how to do it, you know, or me and my brother and the crews, and I would think that you're not up here, and that's not going to work. And it seemed like 100% of the time that I ever had my own idea about doing something, it never worked out too good. And it defied reason how he could stand 300 feet down on the ground and look in a pair of binoculars and tell us how to solve really complex problems. And it wasn't just with erection issues, it was with wiring, and it was with roofing and insulation, and so
wow, this is incredible.
So I came by it naturally. I started off that way. My dad got saved in 1976. He had tubercular and spinal meningitis, and he almost died. And the visitation pastor at our church visited him in church, and he finally gave his heart to Jesus. And we were in this Jesus movement, hopping Assemblies of God church,
right?
That was just blowing and going and growing, but he believed that everything was about working with your hands and producing. If he shook hands with a preacher and the preacher had soft hands, it didn't matter the theology,
right? Because
he would know there's something about life this man misses. He doesn't understand. And so...
Big deal.
Yeah, and so that worked its way into my attitude. You can tell, right?
Yeah, I can tell.
You've been around me enough to know.
But I love it, because I understand it, though.
And so... So being in all these situations served me so well in so many non-building problem quagmires on the mission field.
Beautiful.
That I began to think, you know what? There's something here.
Yeah.
I think differently than some of my colleagues and my coworkers. Problems impact me differently than it does them. I think differently. I view things differently from a different context than some of them. And I saw that the impact of the suffering was in many ways less on myself than it was in people that didn't have that kind of context.
Right.
So then I started thinking, you know what? I think there's a connection between your hands, your head, your heart, and your spirit. Because so many times I began to draw from times that we would be, one of the hardest things to do from a building context is to try to remodel something. And it's because you have to take what someone else has done and make it work. And if you have a business and the bottom line for you is making money, then it has to be right, it has to look right, and it's infernally frustrating because it's not plumb, it's not square, there's endless problems, and once you take off the cover, then it's a quagmire, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the studs aren't in the right place, and they're, and so it developed in me a resiliency of mind and an undaunted attitude about sorting through problems and process. And so I began to notice a divergence from the people around me in their frustration for process and their disconnection over sorting through how to solve problems. Because God doesn't just give you all the answers. And especially if you're dealing with outside your home culture, you run into complex issues, and you got to start taking steps. And if I heard one time, I heard 1,000 times. Can't never did nothing. Can't never could. Don't tell me can't. And so I watched how many times I would think there's no solution for this, and I would see my dad just sort it through.
Come on.
And he would just sort it through. And he would run into a wall, and he would just reroute, and he would just keep at it and keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And where did that come from? It didn't come from sitting in class.
No.
And so it came from me working with my hands. And I think I was probably 18 years old before I got to use new material in the projects that he put me in charge of. So
how old were you again?
I was probably 18 before we used all new material.
Wow.
So we repurposed things. I straightened more nails than I can count. One time, he sent me in to pull down a ceiling, the sheetrock from a ceiling, and he made a round, sharp-edged punch, and he put, you know what a concrete vibrator is? He would put the vibrator up against the sheetrock, and he would turn the vibrator on, and it would crack where all the nails were, and I would drive this hole punch around the nail, put the board lift up there, take the sheetrock down, and reuse the sheetrock.
No, you did not.
Yes. Now, he didn't make me do that a lot, but it seemed it was infernally frustrating, and he did it to teach me something. I kid you not.
Wow.
And so that developed some thinking in my mind, and I began to see a wide gap from all my missionary preacher friends, how they thought and how they approached problems.
Right.
And I kept saying, they just need to be on the job site with my dad.
Yeah. There you go.
They need to do something with their hands. Because I couldn't circle the wagons around. I don't get how can you not go through a process of elimination to solve this problem? And so academics won't do it for you. Academics are important.
Yep.
But it's not the whole picture.
No.
And so to engage somebody, and I think there's probably research now that says when you engage somebody doing something, making something of intrinsic value, it connects nerve synapses in your brain that will serve you in amazing ways in contexts where you're not doing that with your hands.
So reframe that. If a group wants to get unity, they need to have a purpose bigger than themselves. Keep talking like this. What brings a group together?
Okay, so true community cannot be developed without a problem and a common problem around which to work.
Beautiful.
And it can't just be working here.
No.
If you want the whole man transformed, it has to engage the whole man. So, if you're trying to get someone to move forward and there's an impasse, there's an impasse, there's an impasse. And you keep working on that problem from only one context. From an academic context or from a spiritual context. If you have an impasse with somebody, if you will engage with their hands, their head,
Mm-hmm.
their heart,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and their spirit, the God equation, you will every time, if you have enough repetition and time, see transformation in the whole man.
Mm.
Because our spirits and our souls are parked in a body.
Mm-hmm.
Is it not the premise, Josh, of experiential education? The co-constructed experiential learning theory has to have body movement. What does that do?
Totally.
That engages
Yep.
your hands or your body. So now, when you put a group of people with a common problem to solve, you have that, and if it's a complex enough, like building a house,
Yes.
right? So building a house is way more complex than building a commercial building. It's got more pieces and parts. The social dynamics associated with the clients that you deal with are way more problematic. Everybody knows that, right? So it's maybe the most complicated thing to build is a hospital because of all the med gases and the plumbing that's required and all the HVAC things. But other than that, it has to be a house. You know how many pieces of, you know how many decisions that have to be made to build a house?
Just even a tiny house.
Right?
Lots.
Okay, so what value is there in taking that amazing setup?
Mm-hmm.
How much practice can you get at decision making starting from a bare piece of dirt and you turn that site into a house?
Huge.
The amazing transformational opportunity that there is in the wilderness has to do with the creation of conflict. Because you're thrown together, you're making decisions, and you get into conflict. And that happens every single day. And then the facilitators come in and through the monotony of that, if it's long enough, reinforce positively, equipped with tools, and slowly by slowly, people get better and better at making decisions together. Why? Because they're in a hiking group, and they're trying to make it to a known location, and they're all working together to solve this problem. And that activity, that complex activity that engages the whole man, that everybody's trying to get to the same, everybody's weighed in with the same goal, trying to get to the same X, and all of the opportunities that are there, and the conflict that happens, and then the instructors that weigh in, that help them close their interpersonal gaps, and all these things that happen. That's why it's so explosively transformational. You get the same thing out of building a house, remodeling a house, or why? Because you have how many decisions that have to be made. And somebody has to make the decision. Somebody's got to be in charge and pick the decision-making style.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have to be competent at communication. Right? And so we now have a situation where we're pregnant with real life in a concentrated way. So if you take a normal church, most of the focus around a classic church has to do with the transfer of information only.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the transaction of the service, and then maybe they do small groups. But it really is outside the context of whole life. But when you put people together in a project that has complexity and demands and risks, you have the opportunity to engage every part of the person. Their soul, their mind, their intellect, their heart,
Mm-hmm.
their motor skills. And if you have somebody that understands the kingdom,
Mm-hmm.
and they see the amazing opportunity that's right there in front of them,
Mm-hmm.
all you got to do is close the gap and seize the opportunity, and you make it about the kingdom. So there's two big ideas in leadership. There's transformational leadership as a big idea, and there's transactional leadership as a big idea. Or there's leadership and management. Or there's all these terms. But let's stay with transformational leadership
Mm-hmm.
and transactional leadership.
Mm-hmm.
A contractor uses transactional leadership.
Right.
Because his bottom line is, I've got a construction loan, I'm doing a spec house, I'm under pressure, I got to get it built, and I've got to sell it because I need to make a profit, or at least pay my loan off. Right? So, he yells at his carpenter that cuts too many boards wrong. Why? Because the transaction of the cut is costing him money, and it's threatening the transaction of the house. So where's the focus? The focus is all pointed at the transaction. But our mandate in the kingdom of God is transformation.
Right.
So now what I have when my lead carpenter cuts a whole stack of lumber wrong is twofold. I get the opportunity to maintain the proof to him that I love him and his identity and our relationship is intact and it's not threatened. How come? Because I have my eye on the kingdom.
Right.
And the kingdom says I have a relationship that must be valued above everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But I can also now, because I maintain the integrity of our relationship, I can now work on the what of, okay, so dadgummit, why did you cut all the boards wrong? Well, I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so you weren't paying attention last month either. So let's talk about the deeper issue that's involved in
Mm-hmm.
why you keep cutting boards wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Why you're not listening. What's going on there?
Yep.
I'm not going to fire you. You're secure. Me and you were secure. I love you, but this is not acceptable. Let's talk about why. An anomaly, a mistake, we don't even have a discussion over. But patterns that show up, like it's endless the opportunity for real discipleship.
Yeah. Real discipleship.
So if the guy that has
Beautiful.
the money on the line that's trying to get the house built, if he understands that his mandate from God is transformation,
Mm-hmm.
then he can seize the opportunities for transformation and get his house built. Yeah. Instead of only looking at
Mm-hmm.
the bottom line of the transaction. So then the transaction of building the house becomes the tool for transformation.
Yeah.
That's the premise of all experiential learning. Transactions are the tools for transformation. Transactions aren't the focus.
Yeah.
The bottom line is transformation. And when you put a group, when you put a group of people around a common, you will not build community like you want if you don't have a common problem to work on. So let's talk about the broader issues of our society.
Mm-hmm.
Our society's got lots of problems right now,
Mm-hmm.
problems that we've never really grappled with.
Right.
So let's think about it. What common threat do we live under as a nation? There's not really one. For the first time, really, in all of our lifetimes, the Cold War is over. We're really the only remaining superpower. There's no Adolf Hitler to coalesce around. We have the first generation in the history of our country that we're not in danger of dying from starvation. There's no, I mean, we do have the threat of terrorism, but there's no big global existential threat that's looming over us. You see what I'm saying? We're not struggling to, we're not as a nation drawing together trying to solve a World War I crisis or a World War II crisis or a Cold War crisis. It doesn't exist. And so as a nation, we don't have a common problem to work on. So what's happening to the quality of our unity in our community?
Corroding.
It's corroding. It's like collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened right after 9/11? Our unity spiked. Why? Because we had a common problem around which to work.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take groups of people that you're trying to disciple, so we know some things. We've learned some things. We have inner healing.
Mm-hmm.
We have the inner life. We have identity issues. We have all these things that we're working on. But the question is, are you satisfied with the quality of community that you have? Where are we in the holistic grid of what are we working on? I mean, literally, practically. What are we working on together that's really and truly something that can engage us in our whole man?
Yeah.
Well, if you take a small group of people that you want to disciple,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, okay, we're going to build a house. Starting at 6:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And you put a shovel in his hand, and you say, okay, guys, we're going to dig this foundation by hand. And then you start working together. I'm not saying do that, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
You show up, the more that you can do together and the more problems that you can work on together, it's endless opportunities that surface.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue becomes who can facilitate that? Who can be your leads that know how to seize the moment
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't just melt down because, they ruined a roll of wire or a whole square of shingles got messed up or whatever.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
That's not okay, but that doesn't trump the transformational opportunity that exists there and the learning that can take place.
Yeah.
Is it needed for them to be responsible? Is responsibility needed on a job site by the workers?
Mm-hmm.
Is humility needed?
Mm-hmm.
Is diligence needed?
Mm-hmm.
Are ethics needed?
Mm-hmm.
Is honesty needed?
Mm-hmm.
You can make a list and say all the things that are needed in the people on a job site are exactly what Jesus is trying to get us to have in our life.
Right. So the transaction builds the transformation in the character level.
Yeah.
At a character level, if
you don't have a transaction that sets up the honest need for whatever character
mm-hmm.
development that God wants, it's not going to happen. Otherwise, it just ends up being
theory.
Yeah, theory, or you only have in your tool belt your ability to communicate
Right.
concepts. And if all you have is a tool in your toolbox to convey concepts to someone, and that's all that you're trying to do, don't you think it's probably don't you think it's a valid statement that your opportunity for real holistic transformation in that person's life would be limited? Mm-hmm. That's the only tool that you have. It's an important tool because you need that ability to help people jump the gap over this problem that they're up against, and they don't understand why they keep cutting the boards wrong. Mm-hmm. You're off today. What's going on? Mm-hmm. You don't usually do that. What's happening? Mm-hmm. Is everything okay at home? Is everything okay with you and your whoever or whatever? Or boy, your tolerance seems to be really low. You're really irritable today, and we need to stop and figure out what's happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're in the situation with them. You're creating real life, and then the teamwork that's required and the coordination that's required. If you try to do it with a bunch of people, you're lost. Mm-hmm. But if you break it down into a small team, say a framing crew of 5 or 6, if you're framing a house, then man, it's like a no-brainer. It's like a duh. Why? Because you're engaging their hands, their head, their heart, and their spirit. And the smart guy that the Holy Spirit is working with, the facilitator, can seize the moments. Mm-hmm. To speak the life and to speak the message and to use your gifts of communicating the theory and the ideas and how to draw it together and to seize the moment. Mm.
Love it.
How is it? I mean, you can think of 1,000 ways that framing a wall can illustrate to someone spiritual truth.
Right.
Well, you can explain that from the pulpit, and the few people that have ever framed a wall will get it. Mm. But if they're out there and they're not consistent with the stud separations and they don't lay it out right, you know what happens if you just lay out studs 16 inches on center and you just start off and you mark everything 16 and then you go to put up a 4-foot wide board or an 8-foot wide board, wall board. You know what's going to happen. You have to cut every piece. Mm-hmm. Because it's not going to hit in the middle. Right? So you need to offset it 3/4 of an inch, and you start, and then everything just works. Mm-hmm. If it's plumb and square, doesn't everything else work better? Yeah. Yep. So can't you relate spiritual truth from 90-degree, 45-degree, and 22.5-degree angles?
Yes.
Precise precision. Mm-hmm. Because what does that do? That allows you to hit the mark. Mm-hmm. But if your angles are off, and so there's a million ways to do it.
To use the transaction to quit.
Yes. Yeah. If you just seize it. Why? So then, as you're training your leaders, you can talk about self-awareness. Yeah. And you can help people, because you have to, in order to do this, you have to learn to think in terms of kingdom about every single thing you're doing. Every nail in your hand, every tool in your toolbox, every piece of material in your material pile. If you don't think from a kingdom context, you will miss 1,000 nuances that mean transformation in somebody's life.
Right. That's a critical learning curve. That Jesus was a master at this, wasn't he?
So yeah. So how much value is there for you to think about everything from the context of the kingdom? Mm-hmm. So is there value for us in our leaders not to have a separation between the sacred and the secular? oh, that's my church life, that's my spiritual life, and this is my business life. How much value is there if we can just get that to happen? So if you train a generation of facilitators and leaders to use the thing they already know as a tradesman or as a craftsman, to think about it from that context, and to with the help of the Holy Spirit seize the moments that are there, you have no way to compete with the power of transformation that happens. Why? Because there is a common problem around which people can work.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing in the wilderness.
Right.
We have a common problem around which people are striving to attain.
Mm-hmm.
Is it important for us to set goals in life, in the kingdom? Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And the systematic way to accomplish goals, okay, it's one thing to do that yourself. It's another thing to do that with a group of people. What does it take to do something like that as a group of people?
Right.
It just takes everything Jesus wants us to have.
Everything.
And the demands that it places, we know that you can sit there kind of on neutral in your gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody start placing a demand on your gift and it starts coming.
Perfect.
Why?
Yeah.
Right? How many times have you probably preached on that?
Yeah.
Right? Well, the demand on a life, the demand for transformation is placed on someone by the need. That's the transaction.
Yeah.
The transaction creates the need. And the gap gets filled by the facilitation and the power of the Holy Spirit to meet the need. How many times have you preached about that?
Mm-hmm.
You can put it in action.
Yep.
If you build a house, or you do a landscaping project, or you put in a pipeline, or you're doing whatever.
Yeah. So we have a problem with affordable housing in Laramie. We have a couple of presenting problems. We also have a problem with a generation of people, younger people, that are growing up in front of screens, pixels, and they live in a virtual world of video games and social media and Facebook. And we want to be able to get a kid from cradle to grave to be able to have a competency to live well. So tell me what is beneficial about using the trades and construction to take a kid, and why is repetition important for this generation, particularly millennials, mosaics? Why do we need to put in front of them a task of this magnitude, and how will that help them grow to be like Jesus?
Yeah, we work on this a lot. And I've been thinking about that. We were talking about this the other night.
Right.
I had a debrief with a young man at 11,000 feet at night in a blowing rainstorm. And he was struggling with all these things that we were asking him to do in backcountry competencies. Reading a map, navigating off trail, dead reckoning, lighting a fire, doing a bow drill, like lighting this particular kind of stove, and doing all these things that he never had done before.
Right.
And some people come by things easier than others. Some people are more mechanically oriented than others. And so we got to the end of the debriefing, and he says, "Can I be honest about something?" I said, "Please." Like, awesome. Vulnerability, honesty. We're getting somewhere. Thank you, Jesus. And he said, "I'm just tired of being a failure." And that's how he said it.
Wow.
"I'm tired of being a failure." And I said, "Let's unpack that just a second. What are you talking about?" And he says to me, I want to get this right. And I said, are you talking about, because he was really frustrated with his ability to navigate, and he kept not being able to translate the topographical map into his surroundings, and it's another language. I mean, it's like learning another language. And so it takes a minute, and some people get it faster than others, and he was struggling. That was his struggle for the day, but there were all these other things that he didn't pick up these things as fast as he wanted. And some of his teammates picked him up faster than him. And so I said, are you talking about you don't like the fact that you're not an expert navigator right now? And he kind of hung his head. And I said, how many times have you ever done this? Have you ever been on an expedition before? No, sir. Have you ever read a map before? No, this is my first time to try. Have you ever been in the mountains before? No, I've never been west of the Mississippi before. This is my first trip, right? And I named off all these things. This is your first time to try this? He said, yeah, this is my first time. I said, so let me ask you a question. Do you feel like you're a failure because you're not already an expert and you think you should be? Or do you feel like a failure because you didn't give it your best effort? Because we have a value for being all in. Whatever you do in word or deed, do it all with all your heart as unto the Lord. Effort is different than competency. Right? And so he answered immediately. I feel like a failure because I'm not already an expert and I think I should be. I don't already have competency and I think I should. And I said, okay, thanks for being honest. I said, do you think you're being fair to yourself? You've never tried this before. This is your first time. And you feel like you are a failure because you are learning these things. So what you're saying is you feel like you're failing because you're learning. And
wow.
went,
Beautiful perspective.
I never thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I started thinking that I am getting around to answering your question.
Yeah, I'm hearing it.
I started thinking, you know what? With this particular generation, we've branded them that everybody says it. Millennials and what's the next generation?
Gen Z.
Gen Z and mosaics. They're just entitled. You've heard that? Have you heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Probably said that. I said that I don't know how many times. Bunch of spoiled, entitled, you know? And I started thinking about that. And I went, oh, Lord, I'm so sorry. You got to forgive me and forgive us. What we've done is we have marked, put a sentence on these people. Duh! This young man has a total inability to understand what process means.
Mm-hmm.
The disconnect is the process of learning.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we raise our kids, isn't that what we do? We teach them the process of learning. And how do we learn? Routine, oftentimes boring, seemingly meaningless,
lots of mistakes,
dull repetition.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So we can say it like this, and I think we need to say it like this. Lots of failures. Yeah. Because we need to change the way we think about failures.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders, disciples, people, whole, sound people cannot be developed without failure.
Right. Absolutely.
So we have this leadership equation that we either buy into leading to avoid or leading to engage. Leading to avoid says things like avoid failure. And so we make all these decisions pointed at the avoidance of failure. But leading to engage leads us straight forward and failures are the stepping stones on the way to perfection. That's what they are.
Right. We fail forward.
We fail forward. We make mistakes. And how we learn is repetition over and 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 over again.
Beautiful.
It's like this. You're a carpenter, right? You've put up, you've framed. So you've used 16 and 20 penny nails, 8 penny nails, 6 penny nails. You've used the whole size. Have you ever used a spike?
Yep.
You've driven spikes into landscaping spikes or whatever. So if we want learning to happen, if we think about it from this context, if I take a 6 penny trim nail, y'all know what that is, right? It's a little bitty, thin, sharp thing. Mm-hmm. How easy is that 6 penny trim nail to get into a board? It's really easy. You just tap it in there, get it where it'll stand up, and 1 or 2 hits and it's in, right?
Right.
Now, let's take a 60 penny spike that's big around as your thumb and that's about that long. And let's contrast the 6 penny finish nail to the 60 penny spike, or the 80 penny spike, or a railroad spike. If you nail that 60 penny spike, if you pound it into a beam of wood, and you nail the 6 penny nail into it, next to it, and you leave a little head sticking up, which one's easier to get out? The little one.
Sure.
You can pull the little one out with a pair of pliers. Can you get the 60 penny spike out? If a half inch of the head, if it's if it's 16 inches long and there's a half inch of that dude sticking out and it's buried solid in wood,
it ain't going anywhere.
You can't get it out, right? You cannot get it out. How hard was it to get in compared to the 16 penny nail? You have to use a bigger hammer. You got to beat the snot out of it. You hit it, and you hit it, and you hit it. You ever driven one in? Bang, 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 bang. That is how we learn. Important concepts have to be hit over and over and over and over and over and over and over. The big important concepts, the big spikes, they take a lot of dull monotony. You can get a spike big enough to wear you out. You cannot get it in without taking a break and then coming back and hitting it some more.
Right.
And actually, I started off this cohort. I went and bought a big giant spike and a little bitty finish nail. We went out to a telephone pole.
Beautiful.
And I said, here, everybody get a hammer out of the shop. They got a hammer. We walked out into the pasture. I said, here, nail this in. But leave the head in. I said, so we want to see which one can we get out. So they nailed the little finish nail in there and they pulled it right out. So I quit counting Sadler's hits at 200. I stopped counting at 200. He's trying to get the spike in the telephone pole. And he left about that much, all of them did, left that much sticking up. And I got different size crowbars, pry bars, for them to try to get that thing out. And they couldn't even move it. Then I said, all of you work together, see if you can get it out. So is that not what we want? Don't we want integrity embedded? It's so hard that nothing can pull it out.
Yes.
Don't we want honor? Don't we want, I know I'm loved I'm settled. Jesus said it is finished on the cross. I am the greatest focus of God's love. Shouldn't that be a settled issue that no matter what happens, no matter the size of the crowbar that the devil gets or somebody else, he can't move it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's not an endless battery of inner healing sessions necessary?
Beautiful.
No, you laugh, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Is it true or is it not true? Can these concepts get so sunk in our hearts that they're not movable? Yes, that's our hope. It cannot happen without engaging the whole man, your hands, your head, your heart, and your spirit, but in a way that's facilitated right.
Mm-hmm. With an elder, with a responsible,
With the right facilitator,
with the right character, and
who
heart.
Understands how to seize the moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can take a group. You can throw people into the wilderness. People do it all the time, and they get nothing out of it.
Or they end up worse.
Mm-hmm. Or they end up going down the road of false glory, or they do all these things. But you put a group into the wilderness with an Andrew Arnold, mm-hmm. or a Josh Horek, mm-hmm. or anybody of Laura, the instructors at Schramm. You facilitate that right. You seize that opportunity. Yep. You can do. I do it. We do it.
Yes.
What we do in our training is we have 218 technical skill items that we cover in 2 semesters.
Okay,
so
now,
we go over auto mechanics. We go over
unbelievable.
We go over every part of building from the foundation to the roof.
Beautiful. Construction. Okay,
so bow making.
Before we do bow making, okay. So I want you to make a comment like you did the other night around why do parents need to not be snowplow. Describe a snowplow parent, and why do we need to be parenting in a way that allows people to make mistakes and doesn't protect them from blowing it up and pain? Because we have a problem.
You ever raise chickens?
Talk to me. Yes, but talk to me. Talk to us.
So when I was a kid, we had a small farm, and my dad put me in charge of the incubator because we incubated eggs and we hatched chickens. And our incubator had a window in the top of it and a light inside. And I would run in there every day and look in that thing and try to see, is anything happening? Do we have any chickens? Mm-hmm. I put them in there one day and I ran up there the next day looking, are they ready? I was a little kid, right? And I'll never forget the first time I saw the eggs start to rock. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, look! I went running in there and I told my dad, and he's like, no, don't mess with it. I'm like, let's take the lid off. No, don't. It's not ready. Don't mess with it. But look, there's something in there. Yes, there's something in there. That's the point, son. Mm-hmm. There's a chicken in there. It's going to come out. So then I remember this like this was yesterday. All of a sudden, I saw a crack in the egg. Mm-hmm. And it cracked in a kind of a pattern like that. And all of a sudden, a little beak came out. Mm-hmm. And my dad told me, don't you mess with them. Let them hatch, son. And so I didn't listen. I was impatient. And I helped. All of the ones that the beaks were sticking through that had cracks in them, I popped open the eggs. I ended their hatching struggle. I was helping, right? Every one of those chicks died. And my dad made me watch the struggle, and I could remember that if I felt so bad watching the little naked thing and the blind eyes come out, and it was just so hard, and they would have parts of the egg stuck on them, and I wanted to help. And those chickens grew up, and they did just fine. And my dad told me, son, they need the struggle of coming through the egg because that builds strength in them that they need for their life. And if you move the struggle out of the way, you're actually doing them great harm. And so my generation of parents, it started off being the helicopter parents, is what they were called. They would hover over their kids like a helicopter blade and fend off. Nothing negative, no struggle allowed here for my son.
Participation awards.
Yeah, upward in sports. Everybody gets a trophy. Nobody wins. We don't keep score. So nobody wins, but also nobody learns how to lose. Nobody learns how to deal with disappointment. Nobody learns the value and function of failure in their life. Then failure becomes only a thing of indictment to beat them down into the ground in their identity instead of a tool to help them grow. Right? And so there was helicopter parents. Now what they're calling them is snowplow parents. They plow out from in front of their kids all the bumps so that the road is smooth for them to walk. And they've actually done studies on this, many sociological studies, that my generation didn't want their kids to struggle like they did. They wanted them to start off with a 6-digit salary. And so they put an inordinate focus on education, and they educated their kids to the max, and they got them masters and PhDs so that they could start off with a 6-figure income and not have to go through any struggle to get there. Now, if that was me, that happened, I would probably have a disconnect over what it takes to grow. The value for process. My dad, we had this, among other things, I mentioned that we were manufacturers. We had a steel scaffold manufacturing company. So we brought in the pipe and we did everything to produce all the different frame sizes. And so there was this one machine. Do you know what a drop latch is? The drop latch on the scaffold. It's the pin or the post where the brace goes on there, and it's got some kind of little latch that goes down. Where ours was a little post that had a slot with a little lever, so you could flip it up straight, slide the brace on there, and it would flip down and create a T, and the brace wouldn't go back off of it. It kept it onto the drop latch. Well, I still hate this machine. The dreaded drop latch machine. I just hated it. It was this modified milling machine that had a long bar that had little holes the size of those solid pieces of steel, about that long, about big around as your thumb. And it had jaws. It would open, split apart, and I would load little bitty pieces of steel, one right after the other, and all this row of holes, and it was about that long. I would load a whole bunch of them in there. It was like held 50 of them. And I would have to pull this handle, and it was on a motor track. And that bar would, as you rotated the handle, there was a gear, and it would make that slide back and forth. And there was a cutting blade about that big that cut a slot right down the center of that little post. And my dad would make me stand there all day and pull that stupid handle, load 50 of those things in, pull that handle, and cut a slot down the center of that post. And then I'd have to go drill a hole, a little bitty pinhole. And then I'd have to cut the little latch. Then I'd have to drive a pressure pin through the hole to make the latch. And I'd throw them in a bucket. And it was horrible.
All day.
I hated it. But I love that thing now. Why? One day I would be welding or running a milling machine. The next day he'd make me go out and clean vines out of the chain link fence. Have you ever done that?
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible. Monotonous.
Yeah.
Bang.
And what that did
Bang.
for you, all that.
Bang.
Tell us what you did,
Bang.
because we got to end pretty quick. What did it do for you? And why his helicopter? So he wasn't a snowplow dad, obviously. He wasn't a helicopter. He forced you into places of pain and discomfort. And what did that do for you? Having a routine, dig in hard, and what did that do for you?
It gave me resiliency. He maintained, I never had a doubt in my heart, in my mind, anywhere in my emotions. I can't find it there anywhere that I was the apple of his eye.
Mm-hmm.
But buddy, he made me toe the line.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to keep separate who and what. He could work on what as hard as he could because I was secure in who.
Mm-hmm.
How much value would there be in that?
Right.
Right? So it did 1,000 things for me.
Mm-hmm.
All of the failures that I've gone through in my life, the things that I tried that I failed 100 times at, but that standing there, I gotta load it and pull it through another thing. The monotony of not giving up helped me continue to move forward, because one day the thing that I used to fail at, I no longer failed at.
Beautiful.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. You chipped away at detailed things and became competent in bigger things.
Yes, and they grew in an ever-growing
Mm-hmm.
menagerie of complexity.
Yeah.
So that I really believe
Mm-hmm.
that given enough time, I can figure anything out.
There you go.
And that I can get anything accomplished.
Right.
No matter how much I fail, I'm going to get there. Well, it's one thing if you're talking about things you're doing with your hands, but it jumps across having to do with moral issues,
Mm-hmm.
having to do with character issues. Dang, like when I was a kid, I had a problem with lying. But the drop latch machine and the man, I bent over so many nails trying to learn how to use a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned.
Yep.
How many failures? How many times did I lie as a kid and I would get under conviction and go, gosh, am I ever going to get this? Oh, yeah. Oh, I learned how to not bend the nail over. How many times did I fail at that?
Mm-hmm.
You see, that engagement for process and understanding for process is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so with these generations, that's what we need to do.
Right.
We need to stop saying they're entitled. We need to start saying they don't have a grid for process.
Right.
And that's what we need to help them understand.
So the elders in our church planting family of churches, we're going to try to create tangible transactional opportunities like construction, like wilderness, to create liminal space and conflict and tension, but competency as well, so that kids can fail forward. We're not going to hyper protect them. We're not going to helicopter, nor are we going to snowplow. We're going to teach parents how to facilitate this transformation, but we're going to integrate. You're recommending that the Rock Tribe integrate things like construction and business, the trades, into our discipling model along with wilderness. We've already done that, but along with wilderness, we integrate high hand-eye coordination with everyday real skills, life skills. Because if we don't, we'll have too many gaps in people's development.
You'll endlessly be frustrated with, I see this so strong, how come we can't get our outcomes better?
Right. Because there's a gap. People haven't gone through the experiential difficulty of integrating into their life. It stays a theory, it stays a concept and an idea, but it doesn't get pulled into everyday life when no one's looking.
Yeah, if you could work on someone's problem every day versus one day a week.
Yeah.
Which one's
1 hour of one day.
1 hour of one day a week versus
in a air conditioned room.
Exactly. Versus being on the job site where you're working on the same problem, but now you have way more opportunities for repetition.
Right.
You tell me which will give you the strongest outcome.
Yeah. Well, I think we got it. And so when I called Britt, I said, Britt, I am interested in thinking about, obviously we've talked a lot about business, Jeff, and how we can help people to cultivate business, but what about this trades and the housing thing, and maybe even using my own personal situation and need. So the need for making real disciples in the kingdom and solving a real problem in our community called affordable housing. And so that's when I called and reached out to Britt and said, what do you think about us developing a construction strategy, a trade strategy of both solving these problems, and making disciples?
Yeah, I think you have
generational transfer.
You have to do these projects for yourself. If you try to do them for clients, then you have a serious problem.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do it for me first.
But what I mean is, if you can do it for you,
yeah,
and then
I can do the transformation piece.
And if you can do,
because I'll lose money on the transaction.
If you can spec things,
right,
then you won't lose money, and you can get transformation.
We'll grow to. My goal is to grow to that place, and I want to talk to you guys about this. The specking and the business, developing a business out of it that makes disciples and makes money.
Because then what you can
topic.
do, then what you can do is when you have a differential in competency, you can just say, okay, you got to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're working for somebody else, if you're providing a service,
right,
you can't redo a wall 5 times.
No, and it's time sensitive. Okay, so we're gonna end this. Thank you guys for listening. We trust that this has been really helpful. Britt, you're amazing. Thank you for paving.
Is that what you wanted?
That's exactly what I wanted. You paved. You're a pioneer. You're paving the way, and we want to do more of these kind of interviews with you down the road. So, man, thanks for Mountain Gateway, and thanks for your stick-to-itness, because this all is. It's going to actually. We're moving, we think, from a churchy age to a kingdom age, where we actually make disciples of the kingdom holistically, and it's going to take this kind of intentionality to do it.
You got to do life together.
Got to do life together.
You got to work on common problems.
Thank you, Britt. All right.